Resume. Okay. So you're very welcome, everybody. It's nice to be able to see people's faces this time. The last time we did this, we did a webinar, so it's lovely to be able to see everyone's faces. So where possible today, if people put their cameras on, I know someone has mentioned that they can't. If anybody doesn't know the Irish Association for Infant Mental Health, we're a voluntary group, and there are a number of our executive committee members are here today. So I'd just like to take a quick minute for people to introduce themselves. So if you haven't met anyone from the committee, that you know who we are. So I'm Hazel, and I'm the current president of the Irish Association. And I'm just going to mute that. Yeah, I'm holding the presidency at the moment. And I'm going to ask you, Grace, I'm just going to go around as I can see people on just for the EC members, if you don't mind.
I'm in the corner of my screen. I don't know what's happening with my camera, but I'm just going to sit in my little corner. But I have a very funny camera screen going on. But I'm Grace, and I'm the training officer with IAIMH. So some of you guys might have been in touch with me by email with queries before now. So lovely to see everyone.
Great. Thanks, Grace. Sharon, you're next there on the screen.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Sharon Byrne. I'm also on the executive committee. I tend to look after things like the website and the Twitter posts and things like that. And my background is in early education, and I'm part of the leadership cohort for the endorsement process.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Marie, you're next on my screen there.
Hi everybody, I'm Marie McSweeney. I'm also on the executive committee. I'm a past president and I'm a director of the Irish Association for Infant Mental Health. So it's great to see everybody here today, and great that we're now at this point where we're moving on to the next stage in terms of purchasing the endorsement and having that available to people. And I'm also, like Sharon, part of the leadership cohort.
Thanks, Marie. And soon to become policy officer?
With Catherine, something to share. Yeah. Just to add to the list of jobs.
Thanks,
Hazel.
Thanks, Marie. Cheryl, then I think you're next and last from the committee.
Okay, so I'm Cheryl Komsky. I'm new to the executive committee just this year, and my background is I'm a social worker in CAMS department. And I'm very grateful to be here and have this opportunity.
Great. That's great to have you. Thank you, Cheryl. And then Kelly is here with us from the Alliance. So she's going to take us through the morning. It's the morning for her. Kelly had to get up very early to be with us this morning. So the plan is that we'll have this for 2 hours, and then we'll have a break for half an hour and come back. There's some people that are just joining this, and then there's some people that are just joining the second one. So I'll just be allowing people in as we go along. And as others have said, it's brilliant to be at this point. We've been talking about competencies and endorsement in IAIMH for a long time. And I know I said this the last time, but it's really important to acknowledge everybody who was involved in this, the current EC committee, the past people who were on it, and people who had the vision even back then to think about applying for competencies and thinking about endorsement. And recently I was at a pre-congress in Finland, a mini congress in Finland for the World Association for Infant Mental Health. And more than once it was said to me by people that, gosh, IAIMH are really punching above your weight. You hosted the World Congress last year, and now you're going for endorsement, and we're the first WAIM affiliate in Europe to do this. So we kind of take it for granted, even though it's a lot of work. We kind of think about the vision that people had to have to think about that we'd be in a position to do this. So I just want to really appreciate the people that were involved and those that are involved in it at the moment. And hopefully all of you will be part of the process once endorsement becomes available to everybody. So Kelly, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Hazel. And I guess just to echo that, I feel like even when I'll explain more of who I am and all the things, but when I first got more connected to the Alliance and kind of the global world of IAIMH, my connections to Debbie and Ashley, I always heard from Debbie, and Cheryl, wow, those people over in Ireland, man, they really, they're going to get this going. So for a long time, I've heard and admired kind of all of the work that you guys are doing to move everything forward. So it's really exciting for me to get to be a part of, this part of your journey with you all. Okay, I am going to screen share. And like Hazel said, the plan is you guys you would have had kind of a larger kickoff with Ashley and Andrea a few weeks ago, where you did a little bit more of a just kind of global understanding, big picture alliance, big picture competency guidelines, a little bit about endorsement, some of the like research that's been done, connecting pieces like that. This first session today will be more about kind of an endorsement deep dive. So really thinking about endorsement as a sub part of the competency guidelines and what it means, getting into the weeds a bit about the different scopes, the different requirements, what the process actually looks like, so that everyone can feel like they have a pretty solid foundation kind of going into when it opens up for Ireland. We have a good sized group here, but I am hoping at a couple of points throughout this 2-hour chunk, we can go into breakout rooms and kind of let people have a little bit of time with one another to think about what we're talking about, integrate it to how it means for them, ask questions of each other, connect with others, things like that. I do always like to say to people at this point, monitoring the chat and presenting and talking is never my strong suit. So we will have parts in today to stop and ask questions. So please write it down and I promise I'll get back to them. I just can't promise that if someone puts something in the chat that I'll see it right then, but we will have a chance to get back to everything. I do promise that.
I'll keep an eye on that as well, Kelly.
Thank you.
So you don't have to focus on it. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and all questions are great questions. I like just kind of putting that out there as well. We, endorsement, you'll see as we get into things, it is so wonderful because there are so many different ways to get endorsed. And it is also the part that can make it a bit complex. So the goal is not that everyone is going to walk out of this first session and know exactly everything and have all the questions answered, but you will have a solid understanding and know where to kind of find all of those answers as you start to kind of understand what this will look like. So these are just kind of the points that we're going to hit at. And like I said, if there's anything else that comes up, please make a note of it. So who is the Alliance? I like being able to just kind of start there for a little bit because some people, your home is going to be the Irish Association of Infant Mental Health. That Irish Association for a long time has already had a home within the Alliance when Ireland purchased the competency guidelines. But now with the purchase of the endorsement, the Alliance becomes a stronger kind of home or resource for the Irish Association. So the Alliance is the international global organization that oversees what the implementation of endorsement and the competencies look like across the globe. So we have 35 states in the US and then multiple countries that have adopted parts of the system. IAIMH can purchase the competency guidelines first, then purchase infant mental health endorsement. And then if they'd like to go from there, there's also early childhood endorsement. Along with a newer pilot, we have easy translated fully into Spanish. So for some associations that they have a large Spanish speaking population, you can do the whole process kind of translated into another language. You must have infant mental health in order to have early childhood, but whichever steps within the process an association purchases, then the Alliance helps to oversee all of that so that there is reciprocity kind of across all of the different spaces. So we tend to be the home for kind of all of those questions, just like the Irish Association will be the home for all the professionals in Ireland of the workforce, questions, trainings, support, all of those kinds of things. So that relationship between the Alliance and the Irish Association will be one of like support, guidance, TA, especially as, you know, you heard a lot of the EC committee talk about there's this leadership cohort, and we'll talk a bit about that. That is the first group of folks in the country that are going to get endorsed so that they have an understanding of kind of what this process looks like. They go through it first, kind of like how you kind of help support a baby, right? Like you do it for them first, then you do it next to them, then you can kind of stand back and admire. So we'd like to kind of help take people through that process. There will be points in time where the Alliance is here for the workforce. You know, we have a website. We do try and pull together trainings for the workforce that go across the globe. Now that we're in a space where, you know, Zoom trainings are quite the norm, it's quite possible that members from all over the globe can join in trainings together. And Ireland can join a training in Alaska, Washington, Australia, Florida, Texas. So we do try to provide a hub or a resource for folks kind of across the globe. Other than that, the Alliance isn't maybe a major point of contact for most working professionals within Ireland. The Irish Association does become that touch point for everyone. So we support Ireland so that Ireland can support the workforce. This other logo of the Alliance, the one that kind of has the globe here, and because I had to cut it is the only reason the countries aren't showing around the outside, might be the only one that you do see if the Alliance ever sends out kind of messaging. We do have a quarterly newsletter that we send out that we always encourage people to opt into, just so that it's another way that professionals know that when you've joined the Irish Association and then the Irish Association joined us, you are connected to a much larger international globe and workforce, as a way to help, you know, get new ideas. I mean, to me, I always found it so fascinating when I kind of got a little bit out of, you know, Michigan as a state to see the larger whole, to find out what was going on kind of all across the globe to help support babies and all of that. Within that, so to kind of sink into that whole parallel process, so the Alliance is housed in Michigan, and I guess I can help, let's flip the map because this kind of helps to make it a little bit more tangible. So this is the Alliance map. You can see, you know, Ireland is in the corner, and, you know, starred because you guys are like our newest green member, but the Alliance is housed here in Michigan. The endorsement credential, along with the competency guidelines, was all started here in Michigan. So I am in Michigan. I started my professional journey in doing grad school in Illinois, and then moved back home to Michigan and I did developmental home visiting, then kind of finished my master's and started doing clinical work, and then ran a clinical program here in Detroit for others. So my endorsement journey, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, has looked like doing multiple scopes of practice, kind of all here within Michigan. I became a member of IAIMH, which is my professional home here in Michigan, and then transitioned over to the Alliance when the Alliance became a organization to help oversee how this would go kind of across the globe. So all of these states that are in green are members, states and countries are members of the Alliance. Blue is a country or state that is in discovery, meaning that they are doing all of the pieces to purchase some part of the Alliance, whether it's the competency guidelines or endorsement or multiple steps within the endorsement. And the really wonderful part about all of that is that there is direct reciprocity. So that is kind of why the Alliance is put into place, so that as people get endorsed in Alaska, if they were to move back to Washington, or if someone from Texas moved to Oklahoma, there's no needing to update your endorsement. Your endorsement, the process, the requirements, everything that it takes to go through it is exactly the same, no matter what state or country you are in that is in green. So if you do get the chance to move, your endorsement moves right along there with you. The other part that's really lovely within that for families is that families, we know sometimes, at least here in the States, in Ireland, you don't have anybody bordering kind of right there that's also using the credential yet. But if a family were to move from Texas to Oklahoma, kind of right across the border, and they were working with someone when that was endorsed, they could search someone who's also endorsed in their new state and know that there's going to be a pretty similar way of being, knowledge base, and parts like that. So we've really started to learn kind of throughout the history that that's really important to families and really important to professionals. So you can see, I mean, on the map, we're getting pretty big and mighty. And it is also just kind of a much larger, more robust picture that we have for our voice. When we all are in this together and kind of all using the same system, we tend to be able to advocate on a much larger scale for kind of all of the things that we need. And we know that babies and young children and families need. Okay, the competency guidelines. So this was Ireland's first kind of stop on their, developmental trajectory. So we're not going to dive super deep into that. You guys have had them for a little while, but it does feel important just to note that the competency guidelines is kind of the framework, the map, the holding space for what the endorsement then builds on. So the competency guidelines is that map of what we hope working professionals who support babies and young children have in their repertoire in order to do that work. So the competency guidelines isn't something that says if you go to Ireland, you have to go to this place and then this place and then this place on your tour, but in that order. But what it does do is lay a really nice map or picture of all the different parts that we hope you hit in order to then be endorsed and say that you have this knowledge and expertise in helping and working with little ones. So with that, what we also really talk a lot about is that there's no one correct path into endorsement. There's no one way to get endorsed. Endorsement is not, as we dig into this, it is not a place where you are going to sign up to get endorsed and then be given a list of things that you have to do. There are so many different ways to kind of come into this endorsement system and come into this path. So if you like the map picture, you can kind of focus on that visual. If you like this visual, you can focus on this as well. It's the idea that this kind of garden in the middle is where everyone is going to, do their work and find their things, kind of do all the requirements. But you can come into this garden at any different point and then be able to get through here, get your different trainings, get your different education, get your different reflective supervision experiences, because it all counts. So no matter if you came in kind of over here off this path or down here off of this path, it's this center space where we're going to make sure that everybody gets the pieces that they need so that everybody has that same kind of base competency, knowledge, and skill areas. For some people in endorsement, you find out about endorsement way early on, kind of right when you're in school, kind of before you even graduate. For others, endorsement may have come to, your state or your country after you've been in the field for 30, 40 years. Some people don't find out about endorsement until they're retired. It can happen at any point in time. Everything you've ever done and everything you will do is going to be a part of this professional garden that you're going to kind of put together. So when you learn about endorsement, that's a part of it. We also hope that endorsement is kind of a lifelong journey. So as soon as you get kind of connected into this space, we hope that you stay connected, and those things that you learn within infant mental health, critical self-awareness, professional use of self, reflective supervision, all of those things are going to be a part of what you do kind of forever and ever. Endorsement also isn't a one and done kind of thing. It is a kind of lifelong progression and evolution of kind of who we are in the field and how we work with little ones. Okay, this tends to be the first kind of stopping point where people can, pause for a second and kind of start to think about what this means for them. So within endorsement, there are multiple categories. So again, within the garden visual, because endorsement has a place for everyone, there are multiple categories or multiple scopes of practice that professionals can find themselves in. So there isn't just, while there is one credential that we all use, there are multiple ways that people support little ones and their families. And these are the scopes of practice that we try and help people find themselves in. And then it is the scope of practice that dictates some of the requirements that we're going to make sure everybody has within those gardens. So there are 4 scopes of practice, and we do really encourage that people sink into kind of the scope of practice versus letting the requirements kind of dictate which scope of practice they think that they fall into. It feels very important to acknowledge there are plenty of spaces where people can find themselves falling into more than one scope of practice. And that is a very natural part of kind of thinking through what fits somebody best. So the 4 scopes become promotion, early prevention and early intervention, clinical intervention, and then the macro. Within macro, there are a few different ways that you can be macro. So whether it's clinical or research and academic focused or policy focused. But if we just took these 4 boxes and just kind of think about maybe your current way that you support little ones, you would just kind of have a moment to maybe, and if you want, you can close your eyes for a second or just kind of think back and reflect. So promotion is going to be professions, disciplines, spaces where you are promoting infant mental health principles and practices. Maybe you don't have the opportunity to directly support or on a more long-term basis work with the dyad, work with caregivers and little ones, but you are constantly promoting infant mental health principles and practices. So sometimes the examples that I've heard kind of over the globe is sometimes we'll get bus drivers, nurses, lawyers, doctors who see little ones kind of on a somewhat regular basis, but they're not doing treatment. But within those times that they interface with families, they are promoting relationships, promoting attachment, talking about early relationships. The next scope within prevention and early intervention do tend to be some of those examples where professionals are doing prevention and early intervention. So whether that's a home visitor, they're doing a lot of developmental guidance. Sometimes there'll be certain models, and you guys can teach me a little bit about some of what the models are in Ireland, but it could be Head Start, early Head Start, pyramid, parents as teachers, some of those modalities. The clinical intervention scope of practice are those folks that are doing clinical mental health treatment within the dyad. So within baby and caregiver, treating those mental health issues that may come up. And then within macro, like I said, there can be people that have been doing policy work on the intervention and early intervention side. So developing some of those programs, systems, organizations. Research and academic are those folks that are doing research about infant mental health in early childhood. And then also teaching kind of at the universities, teaching others to start to do that. And then the clinical scope within macro are those folks that had been doing the clinical intervention and then starting to provide, reflective supervision kind of on the long term for other professionals. This is the first slide where you start to see how those scopes of practice are going to match up to those category names. So again, please don't feel pressure or stress to kind of be able to put yourself in a row right away. But this is the space where you're going to start to see that those folks that do the promotion of infant mental health in early childhood, the category that is going to kind of align with that promotion is infant family support worker. Those folks that do prevention and early intervention, that is the category that is called infant family specialist. Then clinical intervention and treatment is an infant mental health specialist. And then the macro scopes of practice are going to be the infant mental health mentor categories. And there's something kind of really exciting, and I know Ashley and Andrea got to touch on it a bit when they presented to you all, but we have a new add-on that has been able to open up reflective supervision capacity across the globe, and you can earn the endorsed reflective supervisor to be able to provide qualifying reflective supervision hours to others that are endorsed. And so that add-on currently is available for prevention, early intervention, and then that clinical scope of practice. All right, this is the last slide before I'm going to give everybody a chance to kind of ask some questions and get into some breakout rooms and think of how this might apply to you. So this is the last 3 slides have just been kind of different ways to think about the scopes of practice. So this slide then takes those category titles that we'll find right here, and then these are just examples of what might fall under those scopes of practice. And again, I in your breakout rooms, please feel free to flesh out other programs in Ireland that, and make sense of kind of where they may fall. But quite often, again, in the family support worker, so the promotion scope of practice is where we see administrators, case managers, wraparounds. I always love to share the story of here in the States, we had a bus driver, I believe it was in Texas, who somehow caught wind of infant mental health and was just, mesmerized by it. So they sought the promotion scope of practice to be endorsed because they didn't long term meet with the caregivers and the little ones, but they did all of the things and they wanted to have that knowledge about attachment and kind of what it meant in early relationships. So there is a space for everyone that has a special place in their heart and does work with little ones. We just have to find which scope of practice kind of fits people best. So family specialist then does become home visitors, those folks that are doing kind of developmental guidance, supporting early relationships, whether it's kind of in the classroom or at a hospital setting or within the home. The one in the middle is that endorsed reflective supervisor. So those folks that have had the direct service work, whether it's clinical or kind of developmental direct service work, and then get training on reflective supervision. And again, we'll talk about all the requirements, but that's what that one kind of looks like as a whole. Then mental health specialists, those tend to be those folks that are doing the mental health treatment. I've learned a lot about it in Ireland so far doing some of my vetting conversations. It seems like there's a lot of clinical work that happens within the hospital setting, kind of within, different clinics across the country. So there's many modalities of doing that treatment that could fall into that. There isn't just one modality. It isn't that you have to do IPP or CPP or PCIT or any of those. You could be trained in all of the EBT modalities. It could be play therapy, kind of any of those. It is the endorsement is the thing that says you may do all those modalities, but the endorsement means that you carry that infant mental health and relational lens in all of the modalities that you carry out. And then again, the mentor or macro are those policy advocates, administrators, teachers, researchers, and then the clinicians that have been kind of treating the families and then providing reflective supervision to others. Okay, so I wanted to give everyone, before we get into requirements or any of that nitty-gritty, a chance to kind of, we're going to go into some small breakout rooms, have a chance to connect with others, have, what time is it? Maybe 15 minutes, if that sounds okay, to think about the scopes of practice. Play with where you think you might fall. If there are any other professions or scopes or programs or things in Ireland that I didn't name, kind of think about those. Any other questions that you have in your small group, we'll start with those questions when we come back together. And then kind of where do you see yourself at this moment? If you had to kind of pick your scope, where do you think you may fall?
Okay, I am going to open the rooms, and just to say, because I don't know if everybody has their screen on, because some people might be doing other stuff in the background. So if you end up in a breakout room and you don't have a person to talk to, will you pop out of it, just leave the room, and then I'll be able to put you into another room so you're not left sitting on your own. Okay? So I'm going to open the rooms, and you'll get a 60-second countdown.
That came up. Good job, Hazel. Anything that I can answer for anyone just about scopes?
The question that came up in our group, Kelly, was really around qualifications and how that's linked to scopes, really. Yeah, that was the main one.
All right. Well, lucky enough, that'll be the next thing we dig into.
And Kelly, a question that came up in our group too was kind of trying to figure out, where you're kind of potentially, trying to figure out where your role fits. So say in particular in the infant mental health specialist piece, how much is required of, say, a direct infant parent psychotherapy input, or if you're doing lots of work, but maybe not specifically the infant parent psychotherapy, just trying to figure out the differences between some of the kind of practice-based requirements to fit into each category.
Perfect. Okay, no, that's really helpful, Grace. We can sink into some of that as well. Okay, well, let's keep going, and hopefully I will get both of those points answered kind of within this part. But again, keep writing your questions down, because we'll have another stopping point after the requirements, and I can directly answer any of those questions at that point too. So if you can picture back kind of the garden or the map or anything, it does just feel really important that everyone remembers that endorsement is going to be a reflective journey. So your seeking of this credential, of this endorsement, it's a reflective path. There is not going to be a certain set of trainings that you have to do, a certain number of things that you get signed up and then go must do. There are going to be many, many parts of your professional path that you have already done that will bring you already to this credential. So many of the experiences that you have already had, because I know there are so many wonderful things happening in Ireland, those are going to be some of the things as we look at these requirements that are going to get you to that credential. So please don't feel like as we start to go through these requirements that these are all new things you're going to have to go out and find. These are all going to be things that you probably have done that then we're going to integrate into getting you to the benchmark of what the endorsement and the credential is. So this is a quick snapshot of what the requirements look like. We hope that within an endorsed professional, they have had some educational requirements, some work requirements, some training requirements. Reflective supervision and consultation is a big one. We really, really, really value and kind of prioritize and put an importance on reflective supervision kind of within the workforce. Some scopes of practice do have a leadership component to the requirements. The reference rating forms are a way that a professional can then also give note to how they are. So reference rating forms are sent out as a part of this process so that others can speak to your way of being. Oh, and I just noticed down here, should be membership to Ireland, not Nevada. So being a member in the Irish Association is a part of the endorsement process, because we do very much believe that professionals working in the field need to have a professional home. So if there is one thing that you can leave today definitely knowing is that if you are not already a member, becoming a member of the association is very, very important. And then there is an exam for the mentor scope of practice, and we will talk about that exam as well. But again, all of these requirements are different, slightly different based on the scope of practice, and are a part of this endpoint that takes into account everything that you have done thus far. Okay, here's the nitty gritty. And so I also just like to say there's lots of words on these slides. Please don't get overwhelmed. We're going to go through all of them. And then again, I'll turn this into a PDF and we'll send it to the association. And so then you'll have all of these words as well. So a mental health specialist, and again, that clinical mental health treatment scope of practice, the educational requirement is a master's degree or a higher ed degree. It is, and I think this gets to, your question, Grace. So it is 2 years of paid work providing mental health treatment. That treatment is aimed to produce optimal infant development, caregiver attachment, and relationship kind of within that dyad. So 2 years of having done that work. Again, please know that is for the end endorsement. So some folks can get registered for endorsement and be working on their endorsement for a little while. So you may have only had 1 year of work experience by the time you get registered, but in order to be endorsed and kind of get to that endpoint, you would have had to have those 2 years of paid work experience doing that mental health treatment. There isn't a specific EBT or a specific modality that you have to do, but it is the mental health treatment of that relationship or that dyad, whether you use CPP, IPP, just psychotherapy, anything like that. The training hours for a mental health specialist are 30 hours specific to the competencies. There is also 3 hours of DEI training, and then 10 hours specific to like psychodynamic therapeutic training. And so again, that can look like there isn't a list of certain trainings that count for that. You'll look back at your history, and if there are trainings that a professional attended that was psychodynamic in nature and attended to the infant-parent relationship, then those could be those 10 hours that count for that. And then this scope of practice must have 50 hours of reflective supervision and qualifying reflective supervision hours. And we'll get to that of what that means. But again, reflective supervision in general at this point just being that not administrative supervision where you're kind of sitting and maybe learning more about what to do and checking in on treatment models and things like treatment plans and things like that, but reflective supervision where you're being held by another, being able to be reflective, curious, wonder, think about the parallel process, think about your use of self within the work, think about how you are impacting another, kind of that reflective space. So a family specialist, so those doing prevention and early intervention, there's no degree requirement for this category. And you'll start to see that there are some things that are the same across multiple scopes of practice. So in here, though, no degree requirement, 2 years of work experience where it doesn't have to be the mental health treatment, but it is 2 years of working with an infant or little one and a caregiver, where you have to work with a minimum of 10 families. And the primary focus of that work is the social and emotional needs of the little one. And so many things can kind of fall into that space as well. Many different professions, scopes, ways of being, but making sure that you have that, 2 years. Then again, needing the 30 hours of training with 3 hours kind of specific to DEI. And that's also, I should say, the DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are diversity, equity, and inclusion topics kind of within infant mental health. So really just making sure that you have a training that kind of takes a lead about the importance of diversity, culture, race, ethnicity, power, privilege, a lot of those topics that have been really, become important. Many folks tend to use things like the diversity-informed tenants or things like that to kind of help fit that part. Then within reflective supervision for this scope of practice, we ask that you have 24 hours. And your reflective supervision experiences need to happen while that work experience is happening. So it is the idea that as you kind of go back in your history, when you did that qualifying work experience, so for me, when I was doing, I did home visiting for an organization that worked with blind children. So when I did that, before I was doing my clinical work, I needed to make sure that I was also getting reflective supervision about those developmental therapy home visits that I was doing at that time to meet these requirements. All of these scopes of practice are going to have the need to send reference rating forms, and that was kind of on that first slide. There wasn't enough room to keep reference rating forms on these slides as well. But if you hold in the back of your mind, every scope of practice, every category of endorsement also has those reference rating forms that are sent out kind of along with that. And I'll show you an easy where that comes. So it does feel like for most folks, the difference between mental health specialist and family specialist tends to be the stickiest point for folks, kind of trying to decipher those 2 points. One of the best examples came from an endorsement coordinator in South Carolina who was explaining, trying to support an applicant to think through, like, gosh, am I a family specialist or am I a mental health specialist? And what question has tended to help folks kind of differentiate that is because both can be home visitors, right? You can do clinical work in the home, which is so lovely and really helps to paint the picture of what's going on for the family. But if you are in a home and a mental health diagnosis is identified, whether it's a perinatal mood disorder or early mental health struggle or concern with a little one, if you are the professional that treats that mental health disorder or diagnosis, then you do tend to be the mental health specialist. If you identify that there might be a mental health concern and you refer out to somebody else to treat that mental health disorder, then you tend to be the family specialist. So treatment of the mental health concerns, issues, worries tends to be mental health specialist. In the home, doing developmental concerns, social, emotional, all of those kinds of developmental pieces tends to be family specialist. So family support worker for that promotion scope of practice, again, no degree requirement here. The degree and work experience become an and or. So you could find yourself either having an academic degree and filling that education and work requirement, or you could find yourself not needing to use the academic degree and having the 2 years of work experience with infants and early childhood. The training requirement becomes the same with needing those hours of training, and reflective supervision at this point is not required for this scope of practice. So if there are some folks who, again, the bus driver is a good example to use here, there isn't maybe the capacity or the potential for that professional to have reflective supervision. It is recommended and wonderful and amazing when everyone can get that, but there isn't the requirement of having to have it for this scope of practice. But they will still get reference rating forms that would check in on how they are within the work, but not the requirement of having to have reflective supervision and consultation. So within the macro, like I had kind of said, there are going to be 3 different subsets kind of that macro component. So this first one being the clinical. There is a education requirement for all scopes of the macro. It tends to be a master's degree or higher, or it is a master's degree or higher. There are many different higher ed degrees that can count for that. So that is also another way that kind of opens up to multiple disciplines. They're listed there. We can also really help support specifically in Ireland. I've seen some really interesting higher ed degrees that have kind of come up through doing some of the leadership cohort work. The work requirement for mentor clinical is a build on a bit of what infant mental health specialist is. So it means that you meet the work requirement for mental health specialist, having done that mental health clinical direct service work with families. And then you've also had 3 years of providing reflective supervision to others. So it's a build out of having the work requirement for mental health specialists, and then an additional 3 years of providing reflective supervision to others in the field. There's a slightly higher training requirement for mentor clinical, and that you also have to have the 30 hours of training and then an additional 15 hours of training just on reflective supervision. So again, that can look like some people use the RIOS courses. Some people there's been reflective supervision trainings at WAIM. There have been reflective supervision trainings that the Alliance has done, or kind of, I know, Debbie has come to Ireland and talked about, reflective supervision. So those trainings can come from multiple places, but you need 15 hours on reflective supervision and then the 3 hours about DEI within IMH. These mental health mentor scopes of practice are the first places where leadership activity is required. So leadership activity can look like volunteer or paid leadership activities where it was maybe something within your work where you were asked to do trainings, or you were asked to write research articles or papers, or you were asked to serve on a board, or you were a part of a task force or a workforce development, or you mentor and bring on new folks kind of within your position. So the leadership activities can look like lots of things, but there is a requirement that mentors have a leadership component to their professional development thus far. And then reflective supervision for mentor clinicals is the 50 hours of reflective supervision. And again, 25 of those hours need to be about the reflective supervision that you provide to others. And as we talk a bit more about reflective supervision, that really underscores or kind of stresses the importance of, if you are supporting others, you need to be supported yourself. So that idea of the parallel process and the ripple. So in order to support others, you need to be supported. Your glass needs to be full so that you can pour into others' glasses. These 3 scopes of practice, or the mentor categories, these are the categories that do have a written exam. And I have some slides at the end to kind of give some overview of what that exam looks like. But in order to fully have a mentor category of endorsement, there is a written exam after submitting your endorsement application. Those policy folks. So those folks, these will look very similar to Mentor Clinical, but Mentor Policy has the same kind of higher ed educational requirement. This work experience looks like the 3 years post-grad in infant and early childhood policy and program administration. So again, for some folks, that looks like running a program. For some folks, that looks like being in maybe a government position where you're developing policy. There can be a few different ways that looks, but it's 3 years of having done either administrative or policy work. Same kind of training. You'll see that number of 33 with the 3 hours of DEI is pretty consistent kind of along all of the scopes of practice. So it's the 30 hours about infant mental health principles and practices, and then 3 hours of DEI within infant mental health. Leadership activity again. And then reflective supervision at this point in time is not required for policy folks, but I will say in the last few years, we have definitely seen an uptake and a very positive outcomes that have come from policy folks getting reflective supervision. For policy folks that are, writing the policies about what we should do for our infants, if they get reflective supervision and have the space to think about the decisions that they're making, how that ripples out and impacts people, there has just been some lovely outcomes that have come from that. So there's a lot of intentional work happening right now around how to support policy people to get reflective supervision and to be able to be in those spaces. So not required as of now, but wildly, highly recommended for folks, because we've just seen that has really supported those professionals in being able to feel and understand and know what policy changes are kind of doing to support families. And again, there is an exam for policy. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So then research and academic, that's the last subset of macro work. Same higher ed education requirement. The work experience then looks like 3 years postgraduate in doing teaching at a university or publishing research articles related to the infant and early childhood mental health field. There tends to just be this differentiation of kind of when you're going that way, you either do more of the teaching or you do kind of more of the research. Many folks can find themselves doing both. Positions can have where you have a teaching element and a research element, but it's having 3 years of doing that. Training looks the same as far as, the 33 hours, 30 about principles and practices, 30 around DEI. Then leadership, again, quite often leadership within these roles looks like trainings, publishing articles, publishing research, presenting at different conferences. Again, it can be paid and volunteered. And then reflective supervision, not required, but again, really recommended. And we've just seen a lot of work of this scope of practice developing their own reflective supervision groups and being able to be exposed to holding kind of the parallel process within the scope of work. So what does it mean to be reflective about teaching students that are coming into this field. What does it mean to be reflective about publishing research and what the research means to the field and kind of how all those elements ripple through everything. And then the exam also applies to the scope of practice. So it always feels important, right? We talk a lot about parental history and a lot about, child's history to understand kind of the present being. The addition of the ERS, or Endorsed Reflective Supervisor, is a newer part to the Alliance. So being able to earn ERS is something that has only evolved in kind of the last 2 years. And it came from a space of many task force looking at, we need to open up the field of who can provide reflective supervision. For a while, back when Endorsement was created here in Michigan 25 years ago, it was only clinicians who could provide reflective supervision. And we have just learned through, I know Ashley and Andrea talked about the perceptions of endorsement and maybe the digging deeper survey a little bit, research that's been done. It isn't only clinicians that can provide really wonderful reflective supervision. There are prevention folks, there are so many people who can help support the field and the workforce. So ERS is now available currently for 2 scopes of practice. So if you are an infant family specialist having done direct service work, or a mental health specialist having done direct service work and earned those scopes of practice, you can then add on ERS, or the Endorsed Reflective Supervisor, which means you can provide reflective supervision to others. So for folks that are in prevention that have earned that endorsement, the add-on is a much smaller application process and only looks at that provision of reflective supervision. So it asks that you have provided reflective supervision to others for a year, that you have gotten supervision about providing to others, and that you have those 15 hours of training on reflective supervision. So it mirrors a lot of the mentor clinical, what is required to be able to provide reflective supervision within mentor clinical, but it opens it up as a possibility to more folks to earn. So we have just seen reflective supervision capacity across states and countries that already have, the endorsement, be able to almost double those numbers pretty quickly, because more folks can earn that credential and be out there providing reflective supervision to others. Okay, that's a lot, and I also just like kind of name all the words. It probably feels better if I can see you all. I'll stop sharing for a second. Any questions there? Did I help to answer the things, Grace and Marie, that had come up in your groups? Okay.
There is a question in the chat there from Anne. I know the price for endorsement in Ireland has not been agreed, but could Kelly give us an idea what it typically costs in the USA or Australia?
Oh, that's a great question, and most people don't ask that right away. So I can say, and probably for the executive committee, so as we go through this, all the fees are the home association sets fees. So the endorsement committee, your executive committee, will get a map out of kind of the price ranges of what other states cost, and then they'll be able to set their fees from there. Typically, there are 2 fees that get set. So there's a registration fee for getting set up in the system, and I'll show you what the system looks like in a little bit. That's typically around $25 US. And then the processing fees vary within the scopes of practice because there's different elements to it. If it is a category that has the exam, then the processing fee includes the exam fee. So then that tends to be in the range between maybe $300, $400 US, because that has everything in it. And then for FA or family support worker, family specialist, and mental health specialist, the processing fees for that can be maybe between $100 and $200 US. I don't know off the top of my head what the US dollar holds in Ireland right now, but those fees they'll all be set by Ireland. They'll be announced kind of as launch gets more ready. And then the other part to kind of factor in as well is just thinking about, you will need your membership. So then you'll have your membership to the association, your registration fee, and then your processing fee. And then once you have that, if Ireland decides to charge renewal, there might be a small renewal fee each year. Some AIMs don't charge the renewal fee.
I was wondering if, depending on if it's done by volunteers or if you've paid staff. So if you have to pay staff to manage the endorsement, that might impact the cost, or if it's been done by volunteers. And I know it's different in different places.
But I suppose, like, we haven't really looked into the detail of that in terms of an executive committee, yes, because we're looking for some advice from the Alliance with regard to that. But I think it would be reasonable to say, and my colleagues on the EC, please come in on this with other perspectives. But I think we would look at what's charged kind of by our colleagues internationally, and we'd put the price, but it won't be million miles away to that. You know, we want to be doing kind of things consistently with our international colleagues, really.
That had come up in our group as well, actually, the breakout. And it was just the point that we are a not-for-profit organisation. So whatever it ends up being, it will be to ensure that we are sustainable and break even, but it's not that anybody is trying to make a profit.
Absolutely, yeah.
All great questions. The other thing, I guess this is a great space because endorsement isn't going to be open kind of quite yet. Like, Ireland still has some mapping to do and kind of finishing the leadership cohort. What a lot of folks have started to do once they get this information and get really excited is also take that back to your agencies, your organizations. What happens a lot in the States and even in Australia is that cohorts can get started. And so sometimes you can find funding to sponsor a cohort to go through endorsement and to cover their group of people's membership fees and their endorsement fees. That's a really lovely way to kind of get some of the momentum up and going. So if, just kind of even knowing some ballpark figures, organizations can support a group to kind of go through it and help offset, some of that for the working professionals. And then the benefit to the organization is that they have a really strong, secure, stable kind of workforce as they move forward. Any other requirement question or thing I could answer?
I'm not sure if it's a question for it. I don't think it's really a question for you, Kelly. It's just kind of an observation maybe for the executive. And I was saying in our group, I came to infant mental health working late in my career, but almost all of my career was in the university sector in admissions and evaluation of qualifications. And I would just say to the executive that it's incredibly time consuming and takes an awful lot of time to basically process documentation. People have missing documents, you have to go back to them. There's an awful lot of administration around it. And then you need to basically set standards. There'll be a lot of people in Ireland who may have, who may have qualifications that were not obtained, we'll say, in the Irish university sector that you're not familiar with, and you're going to have to decide is a master's degree in, some South American country equivalent to what is considered to be mastered in an Irish context, because there's different levels of qualifications. So I would just say to just from experience, that I would suggest that a higher fee with appropriate administration support will be much more viable than a lesser fee and everybody trying to do it after they put the kids to bed over a cup of tea in the evening if they're going to, if you're going to do it as volunteers. So anyway, I just throw that out there based on experience. Not that I want to be paying more or anything, but I just would really urge you to consider the viability of assessment. Assessment is time consuming.
Thanks, Anne. That's really helpful. I suppose what we had been hoping as well is that we will use, this is where the Alliance, I think, would kind of come into their own a little bit, Kelly, in terms of using our colleagues internationally who also have the endorsement process to try and get a sense of some of those you know, what's comparable. But I completely see where you're coming from, Anne, that it is tricky. I mean, in terms of the competency guidelines, when we Irishized them, we made up a new word. We use the QQI framework, which obviously is European recognition, and aligned it with the education qualifications as best as we could, but we did recognize at the time that there's probably more work that needs to be done with regard to that. And we also checked in with our colleagues in Australia in terms of what did they do, but it's not an absolute exact fit. And I know exactly where you're coming from, Anne, in terms of people coming with different qualifications from different parts of the world, that it can be tricky, that alignment piece.
And the only other thing that I wondered as well, though, that you haven't got in there, is if people are working in an English language environment, that you also consider putting in an IELTS or an English language competency requirement if they're not, if they don't have it already.
Sorry, Anne, you broke up there.
Sorry, I was just
saying.
that,
because you keep breaking up. Maybe if you want to put it in the chat, that would be helpful, because we're missing a bit of it. But yeah, appreciate your comments about volunteering and not. And I think we will think about that as a committee. And I don't really want to take up the time of people who might have questions about it, because we are thinking about it, and it's stuff that we'll be talking about with the Alliance, and we really appreciate that input. Because we don't want to be doing it after we put our children to bed either. So
thanks.
Thank you. If you could put that, whatever the other piece was that you said in the chat, that would be helpful. Did anybody else? I want to mute myself, but if anyone else had other questions before.
Right. We'll keep them coming, because those were great questions. The one thing, you know, I will also say, to part of what you said, Ian, is the cohort model too, of like, as you guys start to, everyone who's going to leave here and have so much excitement about, you know, getting ready to do the process. If you can do it with a group of folks, and if you can get your agency or your workplace to kind of buy into supporting like the importance of this. I have seen cohorts do something where they, every Friday for an hour, they work on their applications together, or kind of build in some of that time, because not only is it helpful to do it with someone, to have someone next to you to also be going through the process, but there's an accountability piece. There's like setting it aside during work, being able to ask someone questions, kind of, you know, all of those pieces. Okay, I do want to kind of give everybody a visual of what to pick for a second. So all of the requirements that we talked about, and kind of all of the scopes of practice and all of those pieces, there is a system. We affectionately call it EASY. It is the endorsement application system. This is where you're going to chart or record all of those professional experiences that are going to get you to that endorsement. So this is a snapshot screenshot of what the Alliance instance of EASY looks like. Every association gets their own instance of EASY. So Ireland will have their own EASY, which is the place that all endorsement applications will come through. So this drop down up here on everybody's instance kind of allows you to see, you know, where all of the different instances are. There'll be the Alliance, Oklahoma's, Australia's. Ireland can only log into Ireland, but everyone will log into your instance of EASY and build your application from there. And it's an electronic system that allows you to work on it when you have a moment, whether it is in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, but you can build and it will save. The gift of having an electronic system now is that it is much easier to build multiple applications, because again, some people find themselves in multiple scopes of practices. It saves everything. You'll have an ongoing record of all of the things that you've done kind of in one space. The endorsement registry is going to build for Ireland as you endorse more people. The competency guidelines live electronically within EASY, and there's a way to get kind of support and do all of those pieces. Anyone today could go to the Alliance instance of EASY and see the endorsement registry. Our Alliance instance of EASY pulls everyone from the globe into our instance of Easy. So you can check and see all those folks that are, you know, endorsed across the globe there. But Ireland is going to have your own, and you will work through it at your own pace when you are able to. If you go way back in the day from when I first got my first endorsement, we used paper portfolios. And so if you ever hear that word portfolio mentioned kind of in any of these spaces, we did paper portfolios where you had to photocopy training certificates and kind of mail it into a committee to have it reviewed. The electronic system is much easier and much more time saving in doing all of those pieces. When you get into the system, there are going to be the different tabs, the different requirements on the left-hand side where you build out all of the things that you've done. And I think it was your question, you don't have to find all those training certificates. None of those have to be uploaded. So I hope that feels like a little bit of a win in the moment. You just get to enter them as training entries here. No uploading of certificates, no having to find documents. It's okay if you can't find one. Every applicant will attest that they're only going to put in accurate information of things that they've really gone to. So you can then just add a training that you knew that you went to. There's an add training button. There's always a way to get support right here, but you will work through at your own pace and kind of build all of the things that you need to put in. This is the only other quick tab that I'd like to kind of show within for everyone here. There is going to be a competency tab for every scope of practice. So when you log in, whatever category of endorsement you're applying in, that's the requirements that you're going to see on the top of that tab. So it will be specific to what you're applying to. Then your competency tab is going to show all of the knowledge and skill areas that scope of practice needs to have. This tab is going to allow you then to build out where you've learned those areas, whether it was through your training or through your education. You also then, reviewers are going to check to look to see that your work has also given you competency. Your supervision has also given you competencies. And your reference rating forms that we get back that people speak about your way of being will also be another way that you can show competency. But just so that everyone gains a picture of what this will look like when it is open, you build it all through this system. Now, to have a picture of what the process looks like. So you will, when endorsement opens up in Ireland, you will go to that system and register. You will pick the scope of practice that you believe you want to apply at. Sometimes people change once they get going within there. That's okay. That is doable. You will then move from being new to having one of the wonderful people that is spearheading this effort in Ireland move you to in progress, which is then the ability to start to get into your application, build it, put in all the information. There is no time limit as to how quickly your application has to be built. For some folks, they have all the requirements by the time that they get registered. So that in progress phase may look like a couple of months. It may look like a couple of weeks. It may look like a week if you have, you know, a big chunk of time and can get all of the requirements in there. For some folks, that in progress stage can look like a year or 18 months if they're still finishing their work experience or they're still getting reflective supervision hours. This in progress can look like whatever fits you best as a professional. Once you have then met all the requirements and got all the tabs complete, you will submit your application. Your application then goes through a review period where others that have been endorsed and been trained to review applications will review all of your tabs. Make sure that you have hit all the requirements, make sure that you have baseline in almost all the competency areas. They will look for areas of growth. They will look for areas of strength. They will provide some feedback that says, you know, Sharon, you have such wonderful trainings on this, and that. It might be wonderful if you also seek another training in perinatal mood disorder to help support your professional growth and development. We always try and provide some sort of, feedback or area of professional growth. You will get that back. If you are a professional that the exam is not required, as soon as that review process is done, you get that feedback. And if all the requirements have been met, then you are endorsed and you start using that IAIMH credential right away. If you are applying at a mentor category after the review process, you then get feedback about how to study for the exam. You'll take the exam, and after successfully passing the exam, then you start to use the endorsement credential. We work really hard to make sure that when this submission step happens, most people are in the best space to get swiftly through the review process and then to endorse. If for some reason an application gets to the review process and not all the requirements were met, or there was something that was just not quite yet, it tends to be a not quite yet. Maybe that's a way to say a yes, no, or a thing that we were talking about, Hazel. It means that it's not quite there yet. It doesn't mean that endorsement isn't for you and that you're never going to be endorsed. It means that we're just not quite there yet, and you may have to go back and finish up a requirement or seek a little bit more training in something. But the hope is that always an endorsement is a professional path and a professional journey, and we just need to maybe keep putting a few more things there in order to carry the endorsement. So I like to say that so people don't feel like it's never meant to be a hard no. It's meant to be a just not there yet, and continue kind of on that path. Once you've gotten through kind of those areas, again, we really hope that endorsement is an ongoing professional path and journey. So you will always need to maintain your membership, and you will always need to get continuing training and reflective supervision if that was something that was required for your endorsement. So if you got endorsed as an infant mental health specialist, you will always need, at the end of every calendar year, 15 additional training hours on infants and early childhood and 12 hours of reflective supervision. If reflective supervision wasn't required for you to get endorsed, it isn't required that you need it for renewal, but it is lovely at any point in time that you add it to the repertoire of things that you're getting. But again, not required unless it was required for your initial endorsement. The renewal requirement or date is always December 31st of the end of every calendar year. It is really lovely when membership kind of aligns with that. So if Ireland's membership dates kind of go per calendar year, that tends to make things a little bit easier for members to remember. So everyone will just start to get in the habit of knowing at the end of every year, I renew my membership, I renew my endorsement, and that happens by logging back into Easy and adding the things that you've done kind of each year. So some quick fact checks about just experiences in general. So this feels really important that everybody understands, and hopefully we're all on the same page about it already. Your experiences, they don't require. So your work experiences don't require. It could have been that you did direct service work in your history. And that's a little bit of my personal narrative at this point, is that I don't do clinical work anymore. But when I sought my endorsement, I was doing clinical work and I was providing reflective supervision to clinicians at that time. So my work experience and that I've done that, they don't expire. They still count towards getting me towards any requirement. Trainings also don't expire. I always share that I think one of my most influential infant mental health trainings was hearing Michael Trout speak right after grad school. It shaped how I think about the parent-child caregiver relationship. It shapes how I think about early kind of trauma. But I'm getting older, and that training happened a long time ago for me. So I may still put that training in my application, but I'll balance that with also showing that I've done more recent trainings, right? That I'm continuing to grow and continuing to seek new things. So no trainings expire, but we want to keep a good balance of ones that have been there and ones that we still do. And then reflective supervision doesn't expire either. So if it were to be the case where your clinical experiences happened kind of prior in your history, but you were getting reflective supervision at that time, those reflective supervision hours, as long as they meet the standard for what is reflective supervision, that still counts as well. So those won't expire. One other thing about training, I didn't mention this earlier, but it feels important to say now. While that 30 with the 3 hours of DEI, so that 33 total is baseline or is the requirement, it is just a very normative thing that sometimes applicants need more than those 33 hours in order to show that they've hit all those knowledge and expertise areas. So just to kind of normalize that for the group as well is you can start to put in easy those first 33 hours that you may need, but it is very normal that some people may put in closer to 40 or 50 hours just to show that they have touched kind of all of those knowledge and skill areas. I use the metaphor of kind of a pole vault for people as they think about their endorsement applications. The bar that you have to get over is the 33 hours. Some folks, and especially, I mean, it's just been so lovely to meet all of you all and start to learn about kind of all of your experiences. So many of you have close to like 400 training hours. And so I would never want you to spend all that time putting 400 hours in and like you'd be sailing into the clouds to kind of get over the bar. But we'll find a balance of getting you over the bar. That doesn't mean all of the hours that you're sailing through the clouds, but it means that you have covered the competency areas, kind of put enough in, and then being able to kind of be endorsed. So there's this middle ground of getting over the bar, not sailing through the clouds, but getting over it enough that also helps you feel very proud of what you've been able to achieve and kind of do in your professional experience thus far. So a little bit about kind of reflective supervision. So definitely we can get into the weeds with everybody as it comes up and as you start to think about it. There does need to be, the long-term goal is that you're getting reflective supervision from another person that is endorsed. That is a baseline marker, a standard. If the person you're getting from is endorsed, then there is a baseline of knowing that they're getting reflective supervision about the supervision that they've provided, and they've had the training and they've had the expertise in order to be doing all of the pieces. At the beginning, you're not going to have a whole slew of endorsed people across the country. So there is a process to getting people involved in the system and being able to kind of qualify that they provide those hours. For the most part, you're going to be looking for people that are mentor clinicals or people that have earned the ERS add-on. And we will support the association in learning how to do some of this vetting interviewing, which is the ability for someone to start to provide those hours while they're still working kind of on their endorsement. The vetting conversation, they tend to take about an hour. It is making sure that they are familiar with the competency guidelines, familiar with the knowledge and skill areas, and that they have the relevant work history and training on reflective supervision. A few kind of quick parts about the exam. Again, I promise that those folks that are taking the exam, there will be much more support and kind of much more holding and questions and problem solving kind of around that. The exam is 2 parts. So there is a multiple choice section that is part 1 that is meant to test the knowing of infant and early childhood. They address most of the foundational competency areas. It is a 90-minute section with 60 multiple choice. You have to get 80% or better on multiple choice. And again, meant to measure the what you know about the work. The exam itself is a very strenuous process to kind of put it all together, to kind of make a new exam. It is field tested across all disciplines, all scopes of practice, all parts of the globe. And in order for an exam question to become a part of the new exam, it has to have an 80% at least pass rate or better kind of across all of the disciplines. Part 2 of the exam is then specific to the mentor scope of practice that you're in. So for part 1, everyone takes the same multiple choice because it is baseline knowledge and expertise area about infant and early childhood. So research faculty, policy, and clinical all take the same multiple choice. So there would never be a multiple choice question that is so specific to a clinical diagnosis that a policy person wouldn't know. And there would never be a question that is so specific to a certain research article or facet of teaching that a clinician wouldn't know. Part 2 is specific to that scope of practice. So mentor clinicals answer clinical vignettes about providing reflective supervision and then about providing direct service clinical work. Policy folks answer a part 2 scenario about policy work and how to integrate infant and early childhood principles and practices into policy. And then research academic answer a scenario about either doing research in the field or academic teaching in the field. The exam can create loads of feelings for everybody. An exam is an exam, and there is worry and feels that come up. What I like letting everybody know is that everything everyone has ever done in the field will help to prepare them to take the exam. Going through the application process and getting feedback from others about all of the things that you've done is another great way to kind of prep for the exam. But everything you've ever done, whether it's all the trainings, all the work experiences, all the reflective supervision experiences, help to support success on that exam, both in part 1 and in part 2. Part 1 tends to be all of the training and the education and the knowledge and expertise that you've carried on. And then part 2 tends to be really sinking in more to those work and reflective supervision experiences where you can talk more about the how you are within the work, how you integrate infant and early childhood into your policy work, into your research settings, into your academic settings, and into the clinical spaces that you either still provide, because some mentor clinicals still provide direct service work, and then also to how they support others in also doing the work. Once you get to that end line and you start using your credential, this is how it kind of shows up. So again, all the scopes of practice are important. We need all of them. And then within the credential, there is no differentiation between the scope of practice. So we ask everyone to use the same IAIMH with the trademark. If professionals want to designate underneath their credential which category they're at, that is fine. You can definitely do that. You don't have to. So this would be an example of an infant family support worker. This would be an example of a mentor policy. So if you just looked at the top, again, no difference. We all use the same credential. If you ever see this credential kind of across the globe, and as you start to connect with more international colleagues, this is the credential if someone were to carry both infant mental health endorsement and early childhood endorsement. And again, this is an example of where maybe somebody has different scopes of practice. So it looks like for this Jenny Jones, her infant mental health work is doing kind of the mentor clinic or the mental health clinical work, but then her interactions with early childhood are more on that prevention intervention scope of practice. So carrying both. And then if you are a professional who then also seeks the endorsed reflective supervisor add-on, this tends to be how people use it. So again, still same credential, but you would list that you are an infant family specialist and then also an endorsed reflective supervisor. This is the part where I kind of like to just, give a little bit motivation of the why we earned endorsement. It can vary from everybody. I've heard such wonderful narratives kind of across the globe of many different reasons as to why people have sought endorsement. For me, endorsement was the space when I moved back to Michigan where I knew I wanted to do clinical work. I had a master's degree in child development. I had a master's degree in clinical therapy. But to me, it was all about the baby. It was all about, finding the baby, finding the caregivers, helping to support that early relationship. And I wanted something that showed that I carried knowledge and expertise about that. So aside from people seeing my master's in child development and my social work degree, I wanted to carry something that said within those disciplines, I carry special knowledge and expertise about babies and about relationships. So my endorsement did that part for me. It allowed me to be able to have something forward facing that showed within that discipline, I carry this specialized expertise. And so for some folks, if they are a speech path professional or an OT or a PT, they also carry, those credentials, but then they wanted something that showed not only am I a speech pathologist, but I specialize in babies, and I really specialize in helping to support littles and those caregivers in what might be going on within speech and language or within OT or within PT. For me as well, I didn't explicitly say this, but I did kind of highlight throughout, everyone's garden or everyone's professional journey is going to look different. So I have been endorsed at 2 different categories. So when I first started, I wasn't doing clinical work yet. I was doing prevention and early intervention. So family specialist was my first endorsement. Then as I continued on my career and started doing the clinical work and gained the expertise and doing the clinical work and being supervised, and then moved into a position where I was supporting others to do the clinical work, that's when then my endorsement moved to mentor clinical, because that really was then my primary scope of practice. If I had to go back, now kind of maybe 10 years, more than that now from when I earned my mentor clinical, I feel like my work right now is very policy kind of driven. I could go back and maybe also add policy to kind of my endorsement list. At the present moment, having mentor clinical kind of does all of the pieces that I need for the work that I'm at right now. And again, I use the same IAIMH that everybody else will use. But I highlight that just to say that it is ever evolving, and sometimes your scope can change, your workplace can change, what you're doing can change, and if need be, your endorsement can change as well, if that is something that kind of helps promote your professional path. These were just a few quotes that we kind of like having or like bringing up as you all kind of get, excited about what this can mean to Ireland and mean to the field. This is advice that people have shared kind of over the years. There was a study that happened, and we went back and kind of asked everyone, advocate for your employer. I feel like we talked a little bit about this, but make sure that your employer knows that this is coming and the benefits that it can have to the workforce, to your agency, to your organizations. That first presentation that Ashley and Andrea did, they shared lots of information about the perception of endorsement survey, and we can make sure that you all get that. That's a great starting point for folks. The perception of endorsement survey has lots of data around what endorsement can do for the workforce on an individual level, on a workforce level, on a staff retention level. So start sharing that kind of with your agencies and your organizations, and seeing if there is a space to develop a cohort to support people working through it. Folks have said that being a life learner, we've talked about that endorsement is a lifelong process, a lifelong professional place. So endorsement enhances your professional, your personal, your interpersonal relationships. Endorsement is a way to begin tracking competencies and to self-identify. I think when I first went through an endorsement, I started listing everything, and I was like, oh gosh, it has been a while since I've had a parental reflective functioning training, or it has been a while since I've had a training directly about infant mental health ethics. So endorsement allows you to look back, see what you have done, and then look forward and see what might be kind of the next steps that you need. It was also the space for me where I had heard a bit about the diversity informed tenants, but kind of had gone through this and was like, oh, that would be a good thing for me to add to my path and to see kind of what that means. And then the last piece of advice people had shared and kind of was a theme was, don't delay. sometimes getting started is the hardest part. So if you join the association today, start to think about your scope of practice, start to build momentum within your specific agency, then as soon as this is ready and open within Ireland, you'll be ready to get started and get registered right away, kind of within that endorsements easy system. So then specifically, we did pretty good on timing. Specifically for Ireland, the next steps, I'll invite the committee to kind of share anything after this, but these next few months, that leadership cohort is wrapping up, kind of going through the process, kind of with the Alliance instance of EASY, so that they have that firsthand experience of doing their own applications, going through the review process, getting the feedback, sitting for the exam, kind of doing all of those pieces so that they can have that firsthand, think about what it means for Ireland, think about all of those wonderful questions that you guys brought up today about how they want to do it for you all. So they'll be finishing that up through the end of this year, and then this will be all ready to kind of go kind of early 2025 for everybody, sitting there who's ready to kind of get it going. I'll stop screen sharing so that you can see. I'm sure there's going to be much more information kind of coming directly from the association. Is there any space that you guys want to direct people to get more of those specifics?
No, I think where you've said we're at is we're in the endorsement, and I know for me, I'm trying to stay in that place of, I've gone from it being really abstract, which is probably where some people are at the moment, to now using the easy system, and my brain has now gone into actually we're going to be endorsing people, and I have to pull myself back to this piece here around just going through the process ourselves and knowing that it's actually really supportive, and it's not as abstract as I thought it was going to be. So for us on the committee, it's to get ourselves done and then to think about what's going to be possible. I don't think it'll be a big, huge, wide opening because we'll have to stage it and see what we're able for so that we can give everybody the support that they deserve when they're going through this. So that, I suppose, some of the questions that people had today, like we're doing this in public, but we're also doing a lot of meetings together and then with the Alliance as well, so you don't have to worry about all that other stuff. We're trying to contain it for you. And we are thinking about all that, the strategic pieces with the Alliance in the background. So,
and I suppose just to say as well that we are committed to moving it on to the next stage. It's a bit like your don't delay piece kind of had a bit of resonance, because part of I suppose part of the hesitancy has been that we are a voluntary organisation and a voluntary committee, and we know that this is a really big piece to take on. So in some ways, there's never the right time to do it. So we're being brave. And also we've had, as Hazel would have mentioned previously, we have had some very generous support from a private benefactor who has given us the money essentially to buy both licenses. And we still have the challenge of not having any paid employees and, all that sort of stuff. So we're still working all that out. But in the context of that, we are going to be brave and we are going to move it on to the next step. But we also, appreciate people's patience in terms of that the time it's taken us to get to here. It's because it's actually really quite complicated when you're trying to do it within a voluntary association. But we're still going to, as I say, make it happen. Yeah.
Kelly, thank you so much. I'm kind of feeling like unless people have questions, it would be lovely to give, especially if you're logging back on, I'd have to give people an extra 5 minutes to grab something to eat. Is there anybody that's not coming back though that does have a question for Kelly before we finish up? No, belly's probably rumbling. I know mine is. So I think probably what I'll just do is I might just end the meeting, and then just if you all use the same link then at 2:30 if you're joining. I know some people might not be able to come, and we'll have the recording out to you. Sharon has been doing wizarding things on YouTube and figuring out how to set up a channel and stuff, so we'll be able to get this to you fairly soon as well. So if you can't make it later, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you.
And if you can make it, we will see you at 2:30. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks, Hazel and
Thank
Kelly.
you.
Thanks. Bye.